42. Redemption.
In the last couple of chapters, we felt that there is something big brewing in Zarathustra's mind, a major crisis looming on the horizon. This chapter, titled Redemption, only intensifies the spiritual drama, and is, yet again, one of the key chapters in the book. And again, there is a lot going on here. Let's try to make sense of it all.
When Zarathustra went one day over the great bridge, then did the cripples and beggars surround him, and a hunchback spake thus unto him, Behold, Zarathustra, even the people learn from thee and acquire faith in thy teaching. But for them to believe fully in thee, one thing is still needful. Thou must first of all convince us cripples. Here hast thou now a fine selection, and verily an opportunity with more than one forelock. The blind canst thou heal and make the lame run, and from him who hath too much behind couldst thou well also take away a little. That, I think, would be the right method to make the cripples believe in Zarathustra.
Zarathustra presents himself as a sort of a messiah, and the hunchback asks him to prove it by doing what Jesus did, heal the crippled. We hear that people begin to heed his message, but the hunchback points out that he did not convince the crippled yet, and in contemporary culture, helping the weak and winning them over is considered the highest virtue. But we know that Zarathustra doesn't subscribe to this belief, so how is he going to react?
Zarathustra, however, answered thus unto him who so spake, When one taketh his hump from the hunchback, then doth one take from him his spirit. So do the people teach. And when one giveth the blind man eyes, then doth he see too many bad things on the earth, so that he curseth him who healed him. He, however, who maketh the lame man run, inflicteth upon him the greatest injury. For hardly can he run, when his vices run away with him. So do the people teach concerning cripples. And why should not Zarathustra also learn from the people, when the people learn from Zarathustra?
Zarathustra doesn't believe that the crippled should be healed. He points out that there is a common wisdom that their disability is part of who they are, that it gives them their uniqueness, and he asserts that he agrees with this wisdom. If we try to understand it through his philosophy, we would say that having to overcome their disability makes them stronger, and compels them to develop unique capabilities. Taking it away from them will only diminish their power, and thus their ability to happiness.
It is, however, the smallest thing unto me, since I have been amongst men, to see one person lacking an eye, another an ear, and a third a leg, and that others have lost the tongue, or the nose, or the head. I see and have seen worse things, and divers things so hideous, that I should neither like to speak of all matters, nor even keep silent about some of them, namely, men who lack everything, except that they have too much of one thing, men who are nothing more than a big eye, or a big mouth, or a big belly, or something else big, reversed cripples, I call such men.
In contrast with these cripples, who have been crippled by nature, and their disability is thus part of who they are, Zarathustra speaks of a different type of cripples. They are people who fail to use some of their healthy body parts. This upsets the balance in their body, since you have to develop every part of it in order to be powerful, healthy, and happy. Then he speaks of yet another type of cripples, those who give too much importance to one of their body parts, and are harming themselves in the same way as they upset the organic balance. The first type of people have brains but they don't think for themselves, have eyes but don't use them to discern facts, and so forth. And the second type think that they should use only their brains to judge reality, or only their eyes, and are thus not using all their faculties to acquire knowledge.
And when I came out of my solitude, and for the first time passed over this bridge, then I could not trust mine eyes, but looked again and again, and said at last, That is an ear as big as a man. I looked still more attentively, and actually there did move under the ear something that was pitiably small and poor and slim, and in truth this immense ear was perched on a small thin stalk, the stalk however, was a man. A person, putting a glass to his eyes, could even recognize further a small, envious countenance, and also that a bloated sulet dangled at the stalk. The people told me, however, that the big ear was not only a man, but a great man, a genius. But I never believed in the people when they spake of great men, and I hold to my belief that it was a reversed cripple who had too little of everything, and too much of one thing.
This is a funny metaphor about someone who is all ear, which basically means that he does nothing but listen. But note that he has more than an ear. He also has a bloated soul, meaning that he thinks very highly of himself, and an envious countenance, showing that deep down he envies those who don't just listen to reality, but also live it. A very wretched man indeed, but for today's humans, he is considered a great man. They admire those who restrain themselves to such an extent.
When Zarathustra had spoken thus unto the hunchback, and unto those of whom the hunchback was the mouthpiece and advocate, then did he turn to his disciples in profound dejection, and said, Verily, my friends, I walk amongst men as amongst the fragments and limbs of human beings. This is the terrible thing to mine eye, that I find man broken up and scattered about, as on a battle and butcher ground. And when my eye fleeth from the present to the bygone, it findeth ever the same, fragments and limbs and fearful chances, but no men.
Zarathustra now turns to his disciples, and uses the cripples as an allegory for all humankind. We are all, he says, crippled in comparison to what we are supposed to be. Neither the present nor the past ever presented a wholesome man, one whose every part is fully developed and functional. You can find fragments of that man scattered among different humans, but no one comes close to the ideal that he sees in his mind.
The present and the bygone upon earth, my friends, that is my most unbearable trouble, and I should not know how to live if I were not a seer of what is to come. A seer, a purposer, a creator, a future itself, and a bridge to the future, and alas, also as it were a cripple on this bridge, all that is Zarathustra.
In the beginning of our story, Zarathustra was speaking of the future, and urging us to work towards surpassing what we are now, and creating the Superman. Then he lost faith in the Superman, and shifted his focus from the future to the present. He started to preach that self-surpassing should be done not for the purpose of creating a Superman at the end of the long road, but for its own sake, since self-surpassing is the highest joy of all, fusing together the feeling of power with the ecstasy of Dionysian disintegration. So he gave up on thinking of the future, but he could not forget the past, because the past kept asserting its presence. As we heard in the grave song, the fact that things he created in the past were being defiled by other people kept on hurting him, denying him the ability to be fully happy in the present. And now he adds that not only the past, but also the present isn't purely joyful to him, because he cannot withstand seeing the current condition of humanity. He admits that he cannot be truly happy this way, and that he does need the future. Only by imagining redemption for humanity in the future, and working towards it, can he find happiness. This redemption will come when humans, and in that he also includes himself, will stop being cripples as they are in the present.
And ye also asked yourselves often, Who is Zarathustra to us? What shall he be called by us? And like me, did ye give yourselves questions for answers? Is he a promiser or a fulfiller? A conqueror or an inheritor? A harvest or a plowshare? A physician or a healed one? Is he a poet or a genuine one? An emancipator or a subjugator? A good one or an evil one?
Zarathustra gives expression to the questions and doubts of his followers. He claims to be a seer, a prophet of the future, but can they trust that he sees truly?
I walk amongst men as the fragments of the future, that future which I contemplate. And it is all my poetization and aspiration to compose and collect into unity what is fragment and riddle and fearful chance. And how could I endure to be a man, if man were not also the composer and riddle reader and redeemer of chance?
Previously, we heard Zarathustra expressing his distrust of poets, but now he admits that poetry is needed. To bring about the future that he envisions, we need to figure out how to get there. Alas, our rationality is currently incapable of figuring it out. But we have other faculties, and here is where he connects to what he told the hunchback. By not using poetry, he did not use one of the faculties that humanity possesses, and thus could not get to where he wants. With poetry, we can express something that we sense, something that transcends rationality. Poetry presents it to us in the form of a riddle, but humans also possess the ability to solve riddles, and thus advance towards the desired goal. Then he points out another thing that man is, and that is what he calls the redeemer of chance. What does he mean by that?
To redeem what is past, and to transform every it was into thus would I have it, that only do I call redemption.
One of the quintessential lines in the book, a line in which Zarathustra gives us his definition of redemption. Redemption comes when you redeem your past. To redeem something bad that happened in the past, a bad memory, you have to transform it in your mind into something good, until you get to the point where you wouldn't have it any other way. Redemption, says Zarathustra, is the point where you can say that on every single thing that happened to you, even things that happened by chance. This is what he meant by the redeemer of chance. To understand it, think about the religious concept of salvation. Once you get to heaven, you realize that all the things that you suffered during your earthly life were tests you went through, and heaven is your reward for passing them. And heaven is so good that you can look back at every bad thing that happened to you and affirm it as a good thing, since it helped you get to heaven, where your happiness far outweighs the sorrows that you endured. This is how, in religion, the past is transformed into something good, and thus redeemed. But in Zarathustra's worldview, there is no God, no Savior, no heaven in the afterlife. How can we achieve the same kind of redemption in our earthly life?
Will, so is the emancipator and joy-bringer called. Thus have I taught you, my friends. But now learn this likewise. The will itself is still a prisoner. Willing emancipateth, but what is that called which still putteth the emancipator in chains? It was. Thus is the will's teeth-gnashing and lonesomest tribulation called. Impotent towards what hath been done, it is a malicious spectator of all that is past.
The will, or the will to power, as Zarathustra calls it, is an emancipator. It is the drive that makes us overcome bad things and transform them into good things. But until now, he talked about overcoming the bad things that we encounter in the present. There are still the bad memories that we have with us of things that happened in the past, and as long as we have those, our happiness cannot be complete. And the past, it seems, is something that the will to power cannot transform. The past is already fixed, so how can the will to power liberate us from the prison of our bad memories?
Not backward can the will, that it cannot break time and time's desire, that is the will's lonesomest tribulation. Willing emancipateth. What doth willing itself devise in order to get free from its tribulation and mock at its prison?
The will to power, Zarathustra told us, can overcome anything. But here, it seems to encounter an adversary that it cannot possibly overcome. It wants to overcome bad memories. It wants to change the past, but realizes that it cannot. How can it transform something that already happened?
Ah, a fool becometh every prisoner, foolishly delivereth itself also the imprisoned will. That time doth not run backward, that is its animosity. That which was, so is the stone which it cannot roll called. And thus doth it roll stones out of animosity and ill humour, and taketh revenge on whatever doth not, like it, feel rage and ill humour.
Because it cannot change the past, the will to power feels imprisoned and frustrated, and then it becomes vengeful and wants to take it out on someone.
Thus did the will, the emancipator, become a torturer, and on all that is capable of suffering it taketh revenge, because it cannot go backward. This, yea, this alone is revenge itself, the will's antipathy to time, and its it was. Verily a great folly dwelleth in our will, and it became a curse unto all humanity that this folly acquired spirit.
Zarathustra's theory, as was presented to us in the chapter titled Self-Surpassing, is that the will to power is the primary force, the drive that is at the root of everything else. But this left him with the problem to explain why this force, which is all about life and creation, also leads to destructive and life-negating thoughts. Here he finds a way to explain it. The will to power's inability to change the past is the thing that leads it to turn against life, and gives rise to feelings like resentment and vengefulness.
The spirit of revenge, my friends, that hath hitherto been man's best contemplation, and where there was suffering it was claimed there was always penalty. Penalty, so calleth itself revenge. With a lying word it feigneth a good conscience. And because in the willer himself there is suffering, because he cannot will backwards, thus was willing itself, and all life claimed to be penalty. And then did cloud after cloud roll over the spirit, until at last madness preached, Everything perisheth, therefore everything deserveth to perish.
Here we see that Zarathustra is still plagued by what he heard from the soothsayer, who claimed that since everything perishes, all is meaningless. He claims that this way of thinking is the result of the resentment and imprisonment we feel, when our will to power realizes that it cannot change the past, cannot bring what has perished back to life. Humans thus felt life as suffering, and, because human morality says that suffering is punishment, they started to believe that life is punishment for something. For instance, for the original sin. Life itself, and the will to power at the basis of it, were thus branded as bad things. This is why it was believed that everything deserves to perish. Humans simply came to the logical conclusion: everything perishes because everything deserves to perish.
And this itself is justice, the law of time, that he must devour his children. Thus did madness preach. Morally are things ordered according to justice and penalty. Oh, where is there deliverance from the flux of things and from the existence of penalty? Thus did madness preach. Can there be deliverance when there is eternal justice? Alas, unrollable is the stone it was. Eternal must also be all penalties. Thus did madness preach.
We are now caught in this frame of mind, which preaches that life is bad, and salvation can only be found outside of it, in a place where we are not affected by the passage of time. The myth of Kronos, the god of time, who devoured all his children, is an expression of this frame of mind. But Zarathustra assures us that this is madness. At the root of it lies our frustration over not being able to change the past that has twisted our thought. If we can find a solution to this problem, we will redeem ourselves and realize that life is good.
No deed can be annihilated. How could it be undone by the penalty? This is what is eternal in the existence of penalty. That existence also must be eternally recurring deed and guilt. Unless the will should at last deliver itself, and willing become non-willing. But ye know, my brethren, this fabulous song of madness. Away from those fabulous songs did I lead you when I taught you the will is a creator.
And so, we are stuck in this existence in which we feel that we are paying for the sins of the past. And since the past cannot be changed, the sins cannot be undone, and we get no redemption. We are doomed to continue to live this existence and commit more sins. We are forever caught, it seems, in this eternal recurrence of bad deeds, guilt, futile punishment, and suffering. How can we save ourselves from it? One solution was presented by the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer regarded the will as the basis of all things, and saw it as a blind force that craves things, and leads to constant clashes between conflicting wills, which in turn lead to eternal strife and suffering. The only way out, he philosophized, is to transcend the will, achieve a state of non-willing, which in turn would lead to non-suffering. Schopenhauer's thought was hugely influential in the second half of the 19th century, which is why Zarathustra doesn't feel that he needs to elaborate on it, as he is sure that his listeners are familiar with what he calls this fabulous song of madness. One way to transcend the will, according to Schopenhauer, is to contemplate the pure ideas that exist outside of reality, outside of time. The arts, by representing these pure and eternal ideas to our senses, help us achieve it. And the highest form of art is music, because its fluidity represents the chaotic will. By listening to music, we achieve a passive state in which we contemplate the will, and thus can free ourselves for a while from it, and from the suffering it brings. I believe Schopenhauer is that man mentioned earlier, who everyone considers to be a great man, but is actually nothing but an ear. Schopenhauer was also a huge influence on the development of Nietzsche's thought, especially the idea that the will is the primary force. But while Schopenhauer saw it as a blind force that craves things, Nietzsche saw it as a force that wants to overcome things by imposing its rational form on them. When it encounters something bad, it wants to reshape it into something good and beautiful. This is one reason Nietzsche called it will to power, to distinguish it from Schopenhauer's will. And Zarathustra reminds his listeners that he led them away from Schopenhauer's folly, when he taught them that the will to power is a creative, not a destructive force. But can he save the will to power from this problem he now encountered? Can he find a way to creatively overcome the bad past as well?
All it was is a fragment, a riddle, a fearful chance, until the creating will saith thereto, but thus would I have it. Until the creating will saith thereto, but thus do I will it, thus shall I will it.
The will to power shall now be directed to bring redemption, by changing the past as well as the present. How? In the same way it changes the bad things it encounters in the present, by reshaping it into something good and beautiful. It must find a way to rationalize all that has been into something that we wanted to happen. It is actually something that we all do. We call it rationalizing. It's when we get to a point where we can look back at a bad past experience and come to see it as something good. For instance, as something that served as a good life experience, which helped us become smarter and get to a better place. Redemption, says Zarathustra, is when we transform every single bad memory in such a way, and come to see it all as good.
But did it ever speak thus? And when doth this take place? Hath the will been unharnessed from its own folly? Hath the will become its own deliverer and joy-bringer? Hath it unlearned the spirit of revenge and all teeth-gnashing? And who hath taught it reconciliation with time, and something higher than all reconciliation? Something higher than all reconciliation must the will, which is the will to power. But how doth that take place? Who hath taught it also to will backwards?
No one, says Zarathustra, has ever directed the will to power towards that goal of changing the past. Because of that, we remain stuck in this bad reality, in this vicious circle described earlier. If we direct it to change the past, we can redeem ourselves. But, of course, this still leaves a lot of questions open. I pointed out that we all do it. We all rationalize the past. But there are certain bad memories that seem to be too traumatic, and that cannot possibly be transformed into good ones. How can we transform them as well, to achieve Zarathustra's definition of redemption? The answer Zarathustra would probably give is that every time we achieve self-surpassing, we become more powerful, and thus able to deal with and overcome bigger challenges. If we continue to do that, we will eventually become powerful enough to deal even with the biggest traumas. But there's another problem. Remember that his ambition is to bring salvation to humankind. Earlier in this chapter he talked about how he is depressed by the history of humanity, seeing how it contains nothing but fragments of what man can be. To save humankind, he must find a way to transform all of human history, all the atrocities that happened, and reshape it into a good history. Can redemption be achieved on such a grand scale?
But at this point in his discourse, it chanced that Zarathustra suddenly paused, and looked like a person in the greatest alarm. With terror in his eyes did he gaze on his disciples. His glances pierced as with arrows their thoughts and arrear thoughts, but after a brief space he again laughed, and said soothedly, "It is difficult to live amongst men, because silence is so difficult, especially for a babbler."
Zarathustra stops, alarmed, realizing that he said too much, that his disciples might not be ready for this lesson. He revealed something to us, something of what has been taking place in his troubled soul ever since he heard the soothsayer speak. He did not solve all the problems yet, and it is too early for him to reveal where his mind is at right now.
Thus spake Zarathustra. The hunchback, however, had listened to the conversation and had covered his face during the time. But when he heard Zarathustra laugh, he looked up with curiosity and said slowly, "But why doth Zarathustra speak otherwise unto us than unto his disciples?" Zarathustra answered, "What is there to be wondered at? With hunchbacks one may well speak in a hunchbacked way."
This passage shows that Zarathustra speaks differently to different crowds, because he doesn't believe all humans are the same. This provides another answer to why he doesn't want to cure the crippled. If we are to create a better humanity, we will need all the diverse faculties that it has, including those possessed by the crippled. Thus, we should allow all different human types to exist, and learn how to communicate with each of them, to bring them all together.
"Very good," said the hunchback, "and with pupils one may well tell tales out of school. But why doth Zarathustra speak otherwise unto his pupils than unto himself?"
The hunchback caught something. Apparently, what he lacks in erectness he makes up for in receptiveness. He realized that Zarathustra, even while seemingly revealing his deepest thoughts, is still hiding something. There is still a thought that he is not ready to share, even with his followers. In this chapter, we have witnessed yet another self-surpassing, albeit not a very deep and transformative one. Previously, we saw him surpassing himself by giving up on the future idea of the Superman to focus on the present, which can be made happy through self-surpassing. He captured this present using poetry, but then we saw him feeling dissatisfied with poetry, feeling that the poets, including himself, are too shallow. Here, we see him developing a new plan for future salvation, and also re-embracing poetry, but in a different way. His poetry must not be shallow. There are deeper things hiding under the crust of reality, and only our subconscious senses them. They reveal themselves through dreams and visions, and his poetry should try to capture them. Then, with his rational mind, he can try to decipher their enigmatic imagery. This is the new approach, and with that he will try to bring redemption. But there is still something troubling his mind, something that he didn't reveal to us in this chapter. To find out what it is, we will have to wait for a new vision and a new enigma.